Anyway, to make my job much easier, if you could both introduce yourselves on camera and say what your specialty is, and then we'll figure out what brings you here.
So, all right. I'm Sara Kimball, and I am a plant community ecologist. So I do research on how plant communities respond to different elements of global change, such as wildfire.
Yeah. Okay.
I'm Jim Randerson. I'm from the Department of Earth System Science, and I also have appointments in ecology and evolutionary biology, the same department as Sarah, and in civil environmental engineering. And I study the global carbon cycle, Earth system science, how ecosystems are changing at regional to global scales.
Right. And you've been here for a while, as I recall, like 2003 or something?
That's right. Yeah, I've been here since 2003, started as an assistant professor. I've been here for about 22 years. I was a spousal hire. My wife got an offer in the biology department, and so they made me an offer as well, and I've been really happy to tag along and now have a nice research program here at Irvine.
Okay. So it was just the magic of UCI that drew you here.
That's right. That's right. And Ralph Cicerone was the chancellor at the time, and he was really welcoming to spousal couples, and it was really a nice environment. So we were excited to come here. I came across from Caltech, and Kathleen came from University of Pennsylvania.
Oh, okay. And how did you wind up here, Sarah?
So I actually got my PhD here at UCI, but I was doing a postdoc at University of Arizona, and there was a new center that was opening at UC Irvine, the Center for Environmental Biology, and so I accepted a position as a project scientist to kind of develop and run that new center. Okay. So then, since then, my role has changed so that I'm no longer a project scientist, and now I'm an associate professor in ecology and evolutionary biology.
Okay. And did you originate this project, or how did this arise up, this current thing?
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, I've been, as I said, I've been looking at plant community composition and how plant communities locally here in Orange County have been responding to increasingly frequent fires. Like all local researchers, many of my experimental research sites have been directly impacted by fire. And then also I personally have been directly impacted by fire, as have most Southern California residents, or if not all. And so I was really interested in thinking about what we could do to try to help people to understand fire risk and ignition risk, and was of course familiar with Jim Randerson's excellent work, doing work at larger spatial scales than I typically work at. And then I have a postdoctoral researcher, Nikki Fiore, who does remote sensing work. And so Nikki was really instrumental too in coming up with the idea for this project of having a model of fire risk and ignition risk that would be local to Orange County. And so we asked Jim if he would be interested in helping us out with this.
Now, how had fire affected you?
I mentioned many experiments have burned, such as the Loma Ridge Global Change Experiment, which has burned a couple of times. I also do county-wide monitoring. So since 2007, we've been monitoring the coastal sage scrub, chaparral, grassland, and oak woodland communities in Orange County. And so many wildfires have burned those study sites. I grew up in Pasadena, and so the junior high school that I went to burned down in the Eaton fire. My aunt's house burned down. My parents were evacuated. My sister and her family were evacuated. And then, of course, we've all probably experienced days of heavy smoke when it's not safe to exercise outside.
Yeah. Has fire chased you around previously?
Yeah, I had to evacuate my wife's parents from Glendale for the Eaton fire as well. And that was quite a challenge to get in there, past the different barriers and police barricades, and then to convince them to leave, which was actually a real challenge. So yeah, that's had a major effect on our family as well. Luckily their home survived, but it was quite challenging, and they stayed at our house for a week to try to, while everything was, they were trying to recover.
And you've been researching fires for quite a while, have you not? And what drew you to that?
It's my first grant I got from NASA. I was lucky, got a grant to study global patterns of wildfires, and that's been something that's been a theme in my lab for a while, like trying to study across different ecosystems around the world how fires are changing using satellite data from NASA. NASA has an amazing fleet of satellites that can measure thermal anomalies and scars left by fires, and so we use that data to track how fires are changing. And we've done some really nice work, I think, in California to show that the fires, of course, have been increasing considerably, but it's actually led to a disproportionate loss of forest area across the state. We're losing forests at a faster rate than the fires are increasing, and in Southern California, the forests have a really difficult time recovering after fire. So there's been a loss in the state as a whole of something like 7% of the forest area in the last 30 years. And in Southern California, it's closer to double that.
Okay. Have you two collaborated on projects before?
So we had that one project through your postdoc Stain out in Anza Borrego.
Yes. That was fun.
Yes.
And then on the and looking at the changes like in climate in the Anza Borrego Park.
Right. Yes. Increasing temperatures and shrub mortality. And,
Yeah.
yeah.
People think that like deserts are it's really hot there to begin with, so they're not as sensitive to any further changes in temperature, but actually it's quite the opposite, that they're in some parts of Anza Borrego, with the warming that the area has experienced over the last several decades, you can see the shrubs getting smaller and the loss of some species that Sara has worked on. So it is striking, and there's a big risk, for example, not so much in Anza Borrego, but iconic species like Joshua trees are vulnerable, in fact, to warming.
Yeah, isn't there some expectation they might all die off?
Hopefully not. But fire is also a risk for them too. Unfortunately, like we are also changing in this environment. There's a huge human footprint on fire regimes, not only through potentially modifying climate, but also through changing the nutrient environment and changing just the way the land is organized and interconnectivity. And for Joshua trees, a major threat is that there's been a lot of invasive grass that's moving into the desert, and that's terrible. Usually they're so separate. There's kind of these lone single trees that they're really not vulnerable to fire, but when you have a carpet of grass that moves in from multiple types of global change, then the fires can actually continuously burn through, and they burn hotter, and then the Joshua trees are more vulnerable.
Okay. Now, 4 or 5 years ago, wasn't there at least plans to have a constellation of satellites tracking fires,
Yes.
all around the planet?
We put in a proposal to measure and track fires and how hot they are around the planet, and we got to the final round, $200 million NASA satellite competition, and we were selected as the mission was technically competent, technically could have flown, but we lost out in the final round to a satellite system to measure thunderstorms, which is also really fantastically important. But now there are a couple efforts now to build this constellation that are underway by nonprofit groups, and so they're hoping next year to have 3 satellites, and then maybe in a couple years something like 50. And I think both NASA and Canadian Space Agency, a lot of countries are interested in trying to create a constellation in low Earth orbit to measure fires around the clock. 'Cause right now we have large gaps, and when we can see the fires from space and look at how the fires are spreading.
Ideally, would there be some ability for those things to say, hey, a fire just broke out here, and to catch it and put it out before it spreads? Or
Yes, that's a major task. It is really hard because these satellites are getting to higher resolution, so they can the optics are such that they can now detect really small fires. So they'll be able to see like a hot car that's got like a overheating engine. That will also trigger the satellite that there's a thermal anomaly there or a smokestack. And so the challenge is to try to use machine learning or artificial intelligence to say, this is actually a wildfire starting, and it's not just some other random thing like a solar farm that just has very hot panels.
Right.
So that's a major area that many people in my lab are working on, trying to get that early warning detection in a way that allows you to look for those rapid starts.
Okay. And can you tell me about the project that you're embarking on with this, and what the ideas in it came from, and what you hope to accomplish with them? That's probably about 4 questions, but answer the parts you like.
So we've been working on how plant communities respond to not just increasing fire frequency, but also changes in the amount of precipitation. So through one of our long-term experiments out on Loma Ridge, we have found that when you the coastal sage scrub, which is our dominant local plant community, when that plant community is exposed to long-term drought and then burns, that then the recovery is much slower than if the coastal sage scrub is experiencing more just ambient amounts of rainfall. And that there's this positive feedback loop where non-native invasive annual grasses move in, and they are kind of a flashy fuel. They burn pretty quickly, but they also, fires when they go through an area that's invasive annual grasses don't burn as hot. And so it kind of changes the nature of the fire too, so that the coastal sage scrub community historically has burned at longer time intervals. So there might be a fire once every 30 to 50 years. But now with these more frequent fires, the invasive grasses are moving in to these areas, especially when combined with drought. And then when the fire burns, it doesn't burn up the seeds of the invasive grasses because it doesn't burn as hot. And so what happens is after the fire, we just get more non-native invasive grass species that move in, and we're losing those native shrubs that are more accustomed to higher intensity fires. So because they evolved under a system of lower frequency wildfires, the seeds of the natives are often, they'll survive very hot fires and will actually germinate better after fires. We often see a flush of native wildfires after a fire. But with this, we call it vegetation type conversion, where we're seeing a shift from the shrub communities to being more invasive grasses. And that's having this impact on the fire cycle as well. And then we're having a lot more human ignition sources too. So we've kind of, we've worked with the Natural Communities Coalition at the Eco Preserve here on campus, looking at the urban wildland interface, so the areas where houses come right up to the natural area, and trying to understand what can we do in that buffer zone between the open space and the human occupied areas to reduce fire risk and to kind of promote fire safety. So there we were looking at planting cactus, which is a native plant that has a high moisture content. And then we started working with Laguna Canyon Foundation, who manages a lot of fuel modification zones around the city of Laguna Beach. And we brought in students to measure the moisture content of the plants inside and outside of these areas that have been the fuel modification zones, where shrubs have been, the shrub density has been reduced and the non-native invasive grasses have been removed. And we found that the native shrubs have higher moisture content when they're growing in those fuel modification zones. So it seemed like the next step would be to scale it up. We have all this on the ground data too. We do annual vegetation monitoring across Orange County, so we know the height of all the shrubs, what species are there. We measure the thatch, so we know that's the dead annual material that builds up and kind of causes a fire risk. And so we thought it would be great to do some remote sensing work to look at the past fires and how our on the ground monitoring data could be used to inform information from weather conditions and satellite imagery to understand areas of high fire risk and areas that have like lower foliar moisture content and might be more highly flammable. So I don't know if I answered all of your questions.
I think you did, yes. so Jim, what are you bringing to the party here?
Well, I want to build on something that Sarah said about the fuel moisture. It's so important here in Southern California for determining whether a fire will ignite and then whether it will get out of initial control, because all the fires here are suppressed as much as they can be. and then how big it will ultimately get. And some of the most destructive fires in Orange County are ones that occur during Santa Ana events. And these are these really strong offshore winds in the fall. But not every Santa Ana event, we get Santa Ana events, I think we're in one today actually, it's a beautiful day. Not all Santa Ana events generate wildfires. So it's mostly the windy ones. But in some of the work that I've done, the second most important factor on whether a Santa Ana event, besides how windy it is how dry the fuels are. And so, and that's, I think, caught some of us in the community off guard last winter with the fires in the Eaton Canyon and Palisades fire. Normally, like from Sarah's measurements in the fall, when we get the first rains, that the fuel moisture will go up. Like all the shrubs will hydrate, and you'll get this fine layer of grass, and that basically drops the fire risk to close to zero. And so, in a normal year, that will happen in October. Last year, we didn't get any rains until mid-January, and so the Santa Ana events are getting progressively more intense as we move from like August into January, and yet we didn't have the rain. And so in a normal year, we would have been off the hook. That would have been a normal, like we would have had a couple inches of rain. The fuel moisture would be relatively high. All the natural kind of like phenological shrub leaf growth would be starting up. But we didn't have that. And so that was like a 1 in 100 year event of the delay of the rainfall and an incredibly windy event that combined together. So I think what I'm really excited about in this collaboration is to build on some of Sarah's measurements of this fuel moisture. And you can control it spatially, but we also need to understand better, like how, after the first rain, how long does it take for the hydration to happen? And then that risk really drops. And so we can do a better job in, I think, communicating that risk, which is non-intuitive. I think when it's all about the wind or how hot the individual event is, but there's this history of the last 6 months of what the plants have experienced that completely sets the risk during one of these events. And so I think in our collaboration together, we'll have a chance to be able to, I think, really try to improve our understanding of this like fuel moisture and build better models for Orange County.
Okay, so that, I guess, better enables how to predict fires that might be, or the severity of them.
That's right. It's both spatially and, I think, temporal risk. When do you have to stand up all the people who are potentially all the firefighters? When do they need to be on duty? And it really critically is tied to this fuel moisture. And there are measurements that different fire agencies make, but we think that UC Irvine can really play a role here and potentially strengthening both the interpretation and maybe the quality of the measurements that can be used to help with these decisions.
Okay, is there anything that this research might result in some mitigation of the fire occurrences, like to help promote certain plant growth in areas or something? Or
Yeah, well, it does seem like there are some species that have higher moisture content than others, and so those are certainly the types of plants that we would want to plant in fuel modification zones and encourage people to use in their landscaping as well. And it's those, the flashy fuels of the non-native invasive species that are good to avoid. So practices that encourage the native shrubs, but also that the type of fuel modification activities that reduce their cover to increase moisture content, that could definitely help prevent some fires.
Okay, does introducing non-native plants sometimes carry like unanticipated results of worsening things?
Yes, we don't.
Most of the time.
Yeah, we don't want to. The non-native invasive species, not only are they a flashy fuel, they're highly ignitable, but they also have low habitat value for native animals. And so generally just to promote biodiverse native habitats, healthy habitats, we're figuring out ways to do that in a fuel modification zone so that we can promote fire safety, but also have a biodiverse habitat. I think sometimes people start to have kind of a, like the knee-jerk reaction might be to just cut down all plants in order to prevent fires. But actually, if you have healthy native plants, some species like oaks are even resistant to fire. They have fire resistant bark. They can kind of slow the movement of embers into a neighborhood. And so plants really are part of helping us, and using native plants as a tool to help have healthy landscapes and to reduce fire risk is a good way to go.
It's interesting, Sarah, too, like to think in these fuel modification zones that are really important to place around communities, that when those fuels hydrate, it can vary a lot. Like we had a hurricane a couple years ago that might have caused this hydration to happen. I forget the name of the hurricane. There's like a remnant that came up like late August, maybe early. Hillary, yeah. Right, sorry. And then it just, that one, there might have been an early hydration. And then, then we had this other extreme where it's flip-flopping back to not hydrating until mid-January. And so it makes me think too, like you can't irrigate the coastal sage or the chaparral, but in a modified fuel area, it makes me wonder if you could actually like irrigate it enough, like a couple inches in October or September to like shut your risk down a little earlier to get that live fuel moisture to come out. I couldn't do it on a large scale, but something like that, like you could gain a couple months potentially of lower fire risk by some targeted irrigation.
Okay. How has UCI itself changed over the decades in terms of fire risk? What do you think? We doing good?
We're doing good. Like the grass, like in Aldrich Park is zero. That's a good place to go.
Yeah.
So that's it.
Okay, that's
any
good.
place that's covered with grass, that's a really safe place. You're not going to get, I think, I guess it's interesting there have been changes in the risk maps that have been put forth by the state, and a lot of our surrounding communities used to be thought to be lower risk, but the most recent state maps actually put a lot of our surrounding communities, like ones that are close to Bomber Canyon, they're now actually at a much more elevated risk. And there have been, of course, there's the horrific Laguna Canyon fire, but there was also some fires in Aliso that jumped very quickly up into the homes. And so I think there's a greater appreciation that some of the homes in the wildland or urban interface are more vulnerable than we used to think before. And but I think the risk here, like we're mostly stable, like with directly on campus, but the surrounding areas are much more sensitive.
Yeah. With the spread of housing everywhere, has that really increased the zone between like urban and wildfire lands?
Yeah, absolutely. And when we have more humans living close to nature, there's also an increase in ignition sources. So wildfires there are not many natural ignition sources in Southern California. We don't often have lightning. And most of the fires are started by humans. So adding in more roads, more houses, more electrical infrastructure into those wildland areas is going to increase the risk of fire.
Okay.
I think the corridors that we still have, like the Laguna Canyon, they're still very high risk corridors, and there's been development, a considerable amount of development. So there's almost a placement of more assets and more human lives at risk in some of these areas. Like there are well-known corridors that are high wind, like Santa Monica, in some areas where the Palisade fire went through. Those are classic areas, and it is interesting. Like if you look across SoCal as a whole during these Santa Ana wind events, I think before kind of the colonization by the Spanish, I think a lot of the fires would start up. Indigenous people, there'd be some fires in the mountains during the summer, and so they're really good at smoldering. Like get inside a tree, but they would sit there, and then finally in the fall the winds would pick up and they would burn all the way down to the coast, and so it would just obliterate everything in the past. So in the past, these wind-driven Santa Ana fires would just burn all the way to the ocean, and that happened to some degree. Like in the Thomas fire, there's pictures of like llamas standing on the beach next to big embers flying over. Some of the other fires, like up in Santa Barbara County, but it's really interesting. Like San Diego, the Pueblo, and LA. Those are actually in areas that are actually climatologically have low winds. So it's almost like some of the development in Southern California has just kind of evolved with the winds. And there are really vulnerable places where the canyons are just going to funnel the winds out towards the ocean. Laguna Canyon is one of those.
Okay, can you tell us a little bit about who's collaborating with this, both on campus and out in the world?
Sure, yeah, we have a lot of community partners. So I mentioned that we've been working with Natural Communities Coalition and the Nature Conservancy on the annual vegetation monitoring. And so we have a partner at Natural Communities Coalition we've been working with at the fuel modification zone here at the UCI Ecological Preserve. Also, we've been working with the Orange County Fire Authority. We've been talking with Scott Hatch there. We have an ongoing partnership with the Laguna Canyon Foundation and Alan Kaufman. And we've been working on measuring those fuel modification zones. And we also we had Corona Del Mar students come in and help take some of the measurements. But also with Irvine Ranch Conservancy out at the Oak Woodlands. And we've had students from the Delhi Center in Santa Ana come and help take measurements on some of the oaks there. And I'm probably Inside the Outdoors also, Sarah Ludevice. So that's another educational partner that we have. So definitely lots of community partners that we're working with.
That's right. We'll draw upon a lot of like NASA satellite data for this and state resources on mapping fires and the history of fires in Orange County.
That's good. Do you find increased collaboration between departments and schools on campus now than in years previous, or has there always been more that we hear about generally?
Yeah, so it's funny. Like, I think that Sarah's department, Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, arguably collaborates more with Earth System Science than with other schools in the School of Biological Sciences. Yeah. And likewise, Earth System Science, my department, collaborates more with Ecology and Evolutionary Biology, a little bit with chemistry, but also a lot with civil environmental engineering, more than it does with other departments in our school. So it's really exciting to see like the Climate Collaborative come into this space and think about how do we build these collaborations? How do we kind of reimagine how the organizational, graphical interconnections work on campus? Because the schools have been set up, multiple decades ago, classic disciplines, and now a lot of the collaborations are in ways that link schools, but it's not totally clear to some of us that just because you are a school, it means that you should be a school indefinitely. It's going to be fun. We've got some students lined up that and postdocs, so we're excited early next year to start meeting. We'll start meeting with our partners as well, and we were just talking about in my office earlier. Maybe we'll try to design some experiments. Like one thought would be really to think about trying to look at this time delay between the first rains next year and when the shrubs are hydrating and when the fire risk drops. And I'm really excited to learn more about what Sarah's been doing to try to change the fuel moisture by changing the community composition of the different like shrubs and their density. And thinking about ways to manipulate that.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of students working on the project already. So the Center for Environmental Biology that I'm the director of has an undergraduate internship program. Many of our students are Earth System Science majors, actually, that are the CEB interns. And last year, their project of the year was looking at the foliar moisture content inside and outside of the fuel modification zones in Laguna Beach. So they kind of got that started. Yeah. Now this year we have a team of students in the Masters in Conservation and Restoration Science program that are continuing that project as their capstone project. And so they've been continuing to take those measurements, and so that's giving us values over time. And so it'll be really interesting to see how that turns out. We also have some students this year that are measuring foliar moisture content in the different rainfall manipulation plots that we have over at the Eco Preserve, so that we can see how different moisture regimes influence the species and their moisture content. So all of this information that the students is helping to gather will be important to help us develop this model. Yeah, I think our hope is that we'll have a tool that will help inform fire risk locally in Orange County.
Hmm. Are you glad you landed here as opposed to like any other university?
Yeah, I'm super grateful. I mean, it's been a really amazing place to watch the, Earth System Science Department and UCI tackle these really important environmental challenges and to see all the amazing growth. So it's been a great place to be. I would say that we also have an opportunity though, like there hasn't really been the formation of, in Southern California, a university that has pivoted to create its own school or its own center really focused on sustainability and climate. And so I think there's opportunities for future leadership as well in this space.
I've really enjoyed working with so many external partners at UCI. So it's not just all of the great researchers at UCI, but all of the great community partners that we have. That's been really rewarding for me, working with Crystal Cove State Park and the Irvine Ranch Conservancy and Inside the Outdoors, all these organizations. It's been really nice.
Mm-hmm. Well, thanks for taking the time. I hope you enjoy smelling apples in your notebook forever.
Oh, yes. And hopefully you'll have what you need to edit together.
It'll be fun at some point, like in 2 years down the road, to have Jim do an exit interview.
Oh, yeah.
Pardon me?
To do an exit interview with us down the road.
Yeah.
After see what we've learned and
That would be fun.
yeah.
Plus, they'd pay me for that.
All right, that's
So-
good.